The gunshot cracked across the Wyoming plains, a sharp punctuation against the rumbling thunder. Knox Blackwood didn't flinch. He just pulled his stallion, Thunderbolt, to a halt and squinted at the bruised purple clouds swallowing the horizon. It had been 7 years, 7 long, hard years since he'd laid eyes on Violet Kensington. Now a single desperate word on a tattered telegram had sent him careening across 3 territories. The word was Hollister. That was all. No explanation, no plea, just a name that tasted like poison, a name sent from Violet's sister, Catherine. "Almost there, boy," Knox grunted, patting the horse's neck. The animal was slick with sweat, exhausted from 4 days of hard riding. They'd slept under cold stars, forded swollen rivers, and dodged a posse of outlaws who'd taken a shine to Thunderbolt's fine breeding. None of it mattered. Something was wrong in the town of Whispering Pines. Something bad. And it had Hollister's name written all over it. Knox felt the cold, familiar weight of his Colt revolver against his hip. At 32, his face was a road map of hard miles and punishing sun. His beard was thick with trail dust, his blue eyes hard as winter ice. The man who left Whispering Pines was a boy. The man returning was something else entirely, something forged in the deserts of Colorado, tempered by blood and whiskey. He remembered the last letter from Violet, all those years ago. It had been full of Boston society and a future he couldn't fit into. Then silence. A year later, word reached him she'd married James Preston, a banker's son. He'd tried to burn the memory of her out of his soul, but it had clung to him like a stubborn shadow. Now, that shadow had a name attached to it: Hollister. The first drop of rain hit his cheek as Thunderbolt crested the last ridge. Whispering Pines lay sprawled in the valley below, bigger than he remembered. It had grown from a dusty trading post into a proper town, a church steeple clawing at the angry sky. Civilization had come to Wyoming. Knox wasn't sure that was a good thing. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time he hit the main street. He swung down from the saddle in front of the Whispering Pines Hotel, the water sluicing off the brim of his hat. He tied Thunderbolt to the hitching post, promising the beast a warm stall and a good meal. He needed much the same. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of stale beer and wet wool. A plump man with enormous mutton chop whiskers looked up from behind the front desk. "Nasty weather to be traveling in, stranger." "Been in worse," Knox said, shaking water from his hat. "Need a room and a stable for my horse." $2 for the room, 50 cents for the stable," the man said, pushing a dusty registry book across the counter. He had a practiced, friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Planning a long stay?" "Depends on my business." Knox dipped the pen in the inkwell. "And what business would that be?" The man's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. Too sharp. "Personal," Knox said, signing his name. "Old friends." "Well, we're a friendly town," the man chirped. "Herbert Mason. I own this place. Town councilman, too. Knox Blackwood." Mason's eyebrows shot up. A flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition and something else. Something calculating. "Blackwood? Well, I'll be. The same Blackwood from the old Circle K ranch?" Knox's hand drifted toward his gun. "You know me." Mason put up his hands, laughing a little too loudly. "No need for that. Small town is all. The name just sounds familiar. Heard it mentioned once or twice." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "In connection with the widow Preston. Violet, that is." Knox's heart hammered against his ribs. "You know where I can find her?" "Poor woman," Mason said, shaking his head. "Tough time of it since her husband James passed. Her ranch is 3 miles north of town." His voice dropped. "But if you're a friend, you should know she's in a bad spot. Real bad. A banker named Hollister is leaning on her something fierce." The name again. It hung in the air like smoke. "Appreciate the information," Knox said, taking the room key. "Room 4, top of the stairs," Mason said. Then he hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, a word of advice. Franklin Hollister is a powerful man in this town. Some might say he is this town. A man could get himself in a lot of trouble crossing him." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Knox didn't reply. He just nodded and headed for the stairs. He felt Mason's eyes on his back the entire way. Something was very wrong with this picture. A friendly hotel owner who knew his name, his history, and the name of the man on the telegram. It was all too neat, too tidy. It felt like a trap. In his room, he washed the trail from his face. The man in the mirror was a stranger. Leaner, harder, the ghost of a boy he used to be haunting his eyes. 7 years ago, he'd been a 25-year-old foreman in love with a 19-year-old girl who rode like the wind and dreamed of a life bigger than Wyoming. Her father, the judge, had put a stop to that. He'd had Knox fired and sent Violet back east to be civilized. The letters had been his only lifeline. Then they stopped. A year later, he heard she was married. He'd tried to move on. But you can't outrun a memory. Now she was a widow, and some man named Hollister was circling. Thunder rattled the window pane. Knox lay back on the lumpy bed, listening to the storm. He had a feeling the rain outside was nothing compared to the storm he was about to walk into. He didn't just have to face Violet again. He had to face the man who had her in his sights. And he had a sinking feeling that in a town like Whispering Pines, Franklin Hollister was a man who always got what he wanted. The next morning, the sky was washed clean. Knox ate a quiet breakfast in the hotel dining room, listening to the town talk. The Preston Ranch, once the biggest in the county, was on its last legs. Hollister's bank held the notes, and the rumors were flying. They said Hollister wasn't just after the land, he was after something buried on it. Knox skipped the ranch for now. He went straight to the little white cottage behind the schoolhouse, to the woman who'd sent the telegram. Catherine Kensington opened the door before he even knocked. Relief washed over her face. "Knox, you came." "Your wire didn't leave much room for argument," he said, stepping inside. Catherine was older, sterner than her sister, but she'd always had a soft spot for him. Now her eyes were filled with a desperate fear. "I didn't know what else to do, Knox. She's so proud, so stubborn." The story she told was worse than he'd imagined. James Preston had died 6 months back. Pneumonia, they called it. Left Violet with a 5-year-old son, William, and a mountain of debt. Hollister had called in the loans the day after the funeral. He'd given her until the end of summer to pay. An impossible deadline. "She's sold off most of the stock," Catherine said, her voice cracking. "Let go of all but 2 hands. She's working herself into the ground." "Does she know you contacted me?" Catherine shook her head. "She never speaks of you. It's like that summer never happened." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "There's something else. Hollister isn't just threatening foreclosure. He's proposed to her. Twice. He calls it a merger." Knox's jaw went tight. "I see. Be careful," Catherine warned. "Violet's not the same girl. She's been hurt. She doesn't trust anyone." "And I'm not the same man," he said. He rode out to the ranch on a borrowed horse. The place looked tired. Fences needed mending. The barn door hung on one hinge. A small boy was chasing chickens near the porch. He spotted Knox and ran toward the house, yelling, "Mama! Ryder's coming!" A woman stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes. His heart stopped. It was her. The same proud shoulders, the same defiant tilt of her chin. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and she wore a plain work dress, but it was her. Violet. The boy, William, stood in front of her like a tiny guard dog. Knox dismounted slowly, taking off his hat. "Morning, Violet," he said. His voice was rougher than he'd intended. Her green eyes, the ones that had starred in 7 years of his dreams, widened in shock. Then they narrowed into slits of cold, hard jade. "Knox Blackwood," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "What are you doing here?" "Passing through," he lied. "Heard you were in a tight spot." Her chin lifted. "And you came to play the hero?" "I'm managing just fine, Mr. Blackwood." The formality was a slap in the face. Never doubted it. The boy tugged on her dress. "Mama, who is he?" "An old acquaintance, William," she said, her eyes never leaving Knox's. He knelt down to the boy's level. "Pleasure to meet you, William. That's a fine sword you got there." "I'm practicing," the boy said proudly, "to fight bad guys." "A noble calling," Knox said. His eyes met Violet's over the boy's head. "William," she said sharply, "go help Miguel with the eggs, now." Once the boy was gone, her composure cracked. "Why are you here, Knox? Really?" "Catherine," he admitted. "She's worried." A flash of anger in her eyes. "She had no right." "Maybe not, but I came." "Why?" The question was brittle. "It's been 7 years." He looked her straight in the eye. "You know why." Pain flickered across her face before she buried it again. "That was a long time ago. I have a son now. A ranch to save." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "What can you possibly do? Pay off my debts? Marry me like Hollister wants to?" "I'm offering a hand," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Someone who knows cattle. That's it. You can say yes or no." She stared at him for a long, silent moment. He could see the war raging behind her eyes. Pride versus desperation. Finally, she let out a long, shuddering breath. "2 men quit last week. The herd needs to be moved to summer pasture." It wasn't a welcome, but it was a start. "Fair enough," she said, turning to go inside. Then she paused. "Knox, thank you for not saying anything in front of William." Before he could answer, the thunder of hoofbeats rolled toward them. 3 riders. A man in a fine suit on a fine horse, flanked by 2 men who looked more like hired guns than ranch hands. Violet went rigid. "Hollister," she breathed. She whirled around. "William, inside the house, now!" The boy scrambled inside as the riders pulled up. Knox moved to stand beside Violet, a silent, solid presence between her and the newcomers. "Mrs. Preston," the man in the suit called out, his voice smooth as oil. He swung down from his horse. Franklin Hollister was handsome in a soft, predatory way. His smile was all teeth. His eyes landed on Knox and stayed there. "I don't believe we've met." "Knox Blackwood," Knox said. "New hand." Hollister's smile tightened. "Is that so? I was under the impression you were cutting back." "Mr. Blackwood is an old friend helping out," Violet said, her voice steady. "How convenient," Hollister purred. "But I do hope you're not spending money you don't have, my dear." He turned his full attention to her, his gaze possessive. "I've been thinking about your situation. Selling the herd now would be the sensible thing to do. I have buyers lined up. At summer prices, I'd barely cover half the loan," she shot back. "Half is better than nothing," Hollister said, his voice losing its silken edge. "My other offer still stands, Violet. A partnership. It would solve all your problems." Knox's hand twitched. The way he said her name, the way he looked at her, made his blood run cold. "My answer is the same, Mr. Hollister," she said. "No. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." Hollister's face hardened. "The note is due August 1st. Time is running out." He gave Knox a look that was pure venom. "I hope your old friend understands this is a temporary arrangement." "I understand exactly what's going on here," Knox said, his voice low and dangerous. Something in his tone made Hollister take a half step back. He tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Preston." As they rode off, Violet let out a breath she seemed to have been holding all day. "That man," she started. "His friends look like trouble," Knox finished for her. "Bolton and Reeves," she said. "They do his dirty work." She finally looked at him. the exhaustion plain on her face. "This is what you're walking into, Knox. He won't stop until he has this land." "All the more reason you shouldn't be alone." For a second, he saw a crack in her armor. A glimpse of the girl she used to be. Then it was gone. The bunkhouse was mostly empty. Just an old man with a white beard mending a bridle. "Hank, this is Mr. Blackwood," William announced, having followed Knox from the house. The old man, Hank, squinted. "Blackwood? From the Circle K?" He stuck out a gnarled hand. "Heard you went to Colorado." "Long time ago," Knox said. Once William ran off, Hank's friendly expression vanished. "You need to know what you're in for, son. The missus won't say it, but we're in deep. Hollister's squeezing, and he ain't squeezing fair." "I know about the loan." Hank spat into a nearby can. "It ain't just the loan. Fences getting cut in the night. Cattle turning up dead, no marks on 'em. 2 good hands run off after Bolton and Reeves paid 'em a visit in town." He leaned in closer. "There's something else. James Preston. He didn't die of no pneumonia." Knox froze. "What are you saying, Hank?" "I'm saying the night before he took sick, he had a meeting with Hollister. Right here in the main house. I was outside. I heard him yelling. James was shouting about a partnership, about Hollister going back on his word." Hank's eyes were wide with a fear he'd clearly been holding for months. "And then I heard James shout, 'You'll never get the map, you hear me? Never!'" A map. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a dark and ugly picture. Hollister wasn't just after the land. He was after something specific, something James Preston had died to protect. "The next morning," Hank whispered, "James was burning with fever. The doc came, said it was a fast-moving lung sickness. But I saw Hollister leaving that night. He had a look on his face, a look of pure satisfaction. I tell you, Blackwood, it wasn't no sickness that killed James Preston." The air in the bunkhouse felt thick, heavy. This wasn't just about a loan anymore. This was about murder. That night, Knox couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Hollister's smug face, hearing Hank's whispered accusation. He walked the perimeter of the ranch house, his Colt in his hand. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Just after midnight, he saw a flicker of movement by the stables. He flattened himself against the bunkhouse wall, his heart pounding. 2 figures, moving like shadows, were creeping toward the main house. Bolton and Reeves. They weren't just here to intimidate. They were here for something. The map. Knox didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol but didn't fire. A gunshot would bring Violet running, put her in danger. He circled around, silent as a ghost, coming up behind them as they reached the porch. One of them was working on the lock of the front door. "Looking for something?" Knox's voice was a low growl. They spun around, hands flying to their guns. But Knox was faster. The butt of his Colt came down hard on the first man's wrist. A bone snapped with a sickening crunch. The man screamed. The second man, Reeves, got his gun out, but Knox was already moving, tackling him, sending them both tumbling off the porch and into the mud. The fight was brutal and quick. Reeves was strong, but Knox was fueled by a cold 7-year rage. He drove his fist into the man's face, once, twice. Then he heard the click of a rifle bolt from the porch. Violet stood there, framed in the doorway, a Winchester rifle leveled at the man with the broken wrist. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her hands were steady. "Get off my land," she said, her voice trembling but full of steel. Bolton, clutching his shattered wrist, scrambled away, dragging his partner with him. They disappeared into the darkness. Knox got to his feet, breathing hard, his knuckles raw and bleeding. He looked up at Violet. The fury in her eyes was replaced by a dawning horror. "They were trying to get inside," she whispered. "They're looking for something, Violet, something your husband had." He saw the confusion in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "A map," he said. "Hank told me. He said James and Hollister had an argument the night before he died. About a map." Violet stared at him, her mind clearly racing. She shook her head. No. James never mentioned a map. He and Hollister were partners. They were going to expand the ranch together. Knox felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Partners? Yes, she said, lowering the rifle. James took out the loans from Hollister's bank because they had an agreement. They'd bought up the mineral rights on this land together. They were going to bring in a mining company. The whole story was a lie. Catherine's letter, the town gossip. They all painted Hollister as an outsider, a vulture. But he'd been a partner, James Preston's partner. Violet, Knox said slowly. If they were partners, why would Hollister be trying to take the ranch from you? Her eyes widened as the truth hit her, a cold, sickening wave. Because if I default on the loan, he doesn't have to share the profits. He gets everything. And if James had a map, Knox continued, the pieces falling into place, a map showing where the richest deposits are, Hollister would need that map to make his deal with the mining company. And he'd kill for it, she finished, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at the dark spot where James had been buried. It wasn't pneumonia. They stood there in the mud and the moonlight, the ugly truth hanging between them. Violet's husband hadn't been a simple rancher fighting a greedy banker. He'd been a player in a high-stakes game, a game that had gotten him killed. And now, Violet and her son were the only things standing in Hollister's way. Suddenly, a new thought, colder and sharper than the rest, cut through Knox's mind. He turned to Violet. The letters, he said, all those years ago, after your father sent you away. Why did they stop? She looked away, the old hurt clouding her eyes. My father showed me the newspaper clipping, your engagement announcement, to Alina Morrison, your boss's daughter in Colorado. Knox stared at her, dumbfounded. Violet, that never happened. Alina Morrison was 16 years old. Her father would have shot me. But I saw it, she insisted, in the Denver Post. It was a lie, he said, stepping closer. It had to be. Your father. He must have faked it. He was a judge. He had connections. He took a deep breath. I wrote to you for months. When you didn't answer, I wrote to Catherine. She wrote back, telling me to leave you alone, that you were happy. Violet's hand flew to her mouth. Catherine? No, she would never. Unless father intercepted her mail, too. They stared at each other, the weight of 7 years of lies and manipulation crashing down around them. They hadn't drifted apart. They had been torn apart, deliberately, cruelly, by her own father. He wanted me to marry someone respectable, she whispered. James. His family had money, connections. It was what my father always wanted for me. And what did you want, Violet? He asked, his voice soft. Before she could answer, a light appeared in the window of the main house. William. The boy was standing there, watching them. The sight of him, small and vulnerable, broke the spell. We need to find that map, Violet said, her voice hardening again, the moment of connection gone. She was a mother first. It's the only proof we have, the only thing that can stop Hollister. She was right. This wasn't about their past anymore. It was about her son's future. They spent the rest of the night tearing the house apart. They searched James's office, his desk, his books. Nothing. They checked his saddlebags in the barn, his old footlocker in the attic. Still nothing. It was like the map had vanished into thin air. As dawn broke, they stood exhausted in the cluttered office. It's not here, Violet said, slumping into a chair. Maybe Hank was wrong. Maybe James destroyed it. Or maybe, Knox said, looking around the room, he hid it somewhere no one would ever think to look. His eyes fell on a large framed portrait of Judge Kensington hanging over the fireplace. The judge stared down at them, his expression cold and disapproving. The man who had ruined their lives. Knox walked over to the portrait. He ran his fingers along the heavy, ornate frame. "James hated your father," he said. "Catherine told me. He blamed the judge for your unhappiness." "He did," Violet confirmed. "He refused to hang this portrait, but I insisted. For tradition." "Maybe James found a way to make the judge useful after all," Knox mused. He tapped the thick canvas. It felt solid. Too solid. He took his knife from his belt and carefully sliced along the edge of the painting. He peeled back the canvas of Judge Kensington's sneering face. And underneath, glued to the wooden backboard, was another piece of canvas. A hand-drawn map. It was covered in lines and symbols, marking veins of copper, and in one secluded corner of the property, a small, crudely drawn star with a single word written next to it. Gold. This wasn't just about a mining partnership. This was about a fortune. A fortune Hollister had murdered for. And now, they held the key. But as they stared at the map, a horrifying realization dawned on them. The star, the location of the gold, was marked on a piece of land known as Miller's Creek. And Violet had sold that parcel of land 2 months ago. She'd sold it to Herbert Mason, the friendly hotel owner, the man on the town council, the man who had warned Knox about crossing Hollister. The trap wasn't just closing. They were already caught in it. Mason wasn't just a friend of Hollister's. He was a part of the whole crooked scheme. "We have to get this to the sheriff," Violet said, her voice shaking as she rolled up the map. "The sheriff?" Knox said grimly. "In a town where Hollister and a councilman own everything? How do we know who he works for?" He was right. They were completely alone. They had the proof, but they were trapped on a ranch surrounded by men who would kill to get it back. As if on cue, they heard hoofbeats. A lot of them. Coming fast. Knox ran to the window. It wasn't just Hollister and his 2 thugs. It was a dozen men, all armed, riding hard for the ranch. Mason was with them, riding right beside Hollister. "They know," Violet breathed. "They must have been watching the house." "Get William," Knox said, grabbing the Winchester. "Go out the back. Take Thunderbolt. He's the fastest. Ride for the hills and don't stop." "I'm not leaving you." "This isn't a discussion, Violet. Go!" He shoved the map into her hands. "Protect this. Protect our son." The words hung in the air. Our son. She stared at him for a second, her eyes full of fear and 1,000 unspoken things. Then she turned and ran. Knox barricaded the front door with a heavy desk. He checked his Colt, his Winchester, 12-1. The odds were long. But he wasn't the 25-year-old boy who'd been run out of town. He was a man with nothing left to lose and a promise to keep. The first bullet splintered the door frame. The siege had begun. Knox held them off for what felt like an eternity. He was a good shot, and the house provided good cover. He dropped 2 of their horses, then one of the men who got too brave. They fell back, content to pepper the house with lead from a distance. They weren't trying to kill him. Not yet. They were trying to pin him down. Because they weren't just attacking the house. He realized it with a sickening lurch in his stomach. This was a diversion. Their real target was Violet. He had to get to her. He smashed a back window and crawled out, keeping low. He could hear them shouting in the front. He used the chaos as cover, sprinting for the stables. His borrowed horse was still there. He swung into the saddle and kicked the animal into a gallop, heading for the hills where he'd sent Violet. He rode like a madman, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. He prayed he was in time. He topped a ridge and scanned the valley below, and then he saw her. Thunderbolt was a magnificent horse, but he was carrying double. Violet held William in front of her, the boy clinging to the saddle horn. And they weren't alone. 3 of Hollister's men were closing in on them, gaining with every stride. Knox didn't think. He just acted. He let out a raw, furious yell and charged down the hillside, firing his Winchester from the saddle. He wasn't aiming to kill, he was aiming for their horses. One of the animals screamed and went down, sending its rider flying. The other two reined in, surprised by the attack from their flank. It was the opening Violet needed. She urged Thunderbolt on, widening the gap. Now it was 2-on-1. Knox dropped the empty Winchester and drew his Colt. The riders split up, trying to circle him. He held his ground, firing methodically. He was a ranch hand, not a gunfighter, but desperation made a man quick. He caught one of the men in the shoulder. The man cried out and sagged in his saddle, his horse bolting. The last rider was Reeves, the bigger of Hollister's two main thugs. He grinned, a cruel, ugly slash in his face. "Just you and me now, cowboy." They charged each other. It was madness, a joust of iron and lead. Knox felt a searing pain in his left arm as a bullet grazed him. His own shot went wide. They thundered past each other, wheels turning to face off again. But as Knox fought for control of his terrified horse, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Violet had stopped. She was 100 yards away, watching the fight, and she wasn't alone. Hollister was there. He'd come up a different way. He had his arm around William's neck, a pistol pressed to the boy's head. "Drop it, Blackwood!" Hollister screamed, his voice thin and panicked. "Or the boy dies!" Reeves laughed, reining in his horse. "Looks like we win." Knox's world narrowed to that single horrific image. Violet, her face a mask of terror. William, so small, so helpless. Hollister, his eyes wild. He had no choice. He let his Colt fall to the dusty ground. "Now get off the horse," Hollister commanded. "Slowly." Knox did as he was told. His arm was on fire, but he barely felt it. Reeves dismounted, his gun trained on Knox's chest. "The map, Violet," Hollister said, his voice strained. "Give it to me." Violet didn't move. She was holding the rolled-up canvas in one hand. "Now!" Hollister shrieked, pressing the gun harder against William's temple. The boy whimpered. "All right!" Violet cried. "Don't hurt him!" She started to walk forward, holding out the map. Knox's mind was racing. This was it, the end game. Once Hollister had the map, they were all dead. There would be no witnesses. He had to do something. But what? Reeves was 10 feet away, his gun rock steady. Any sudden move, and he was a dead man. Then he saw it. A small movement from the ridge behind Hollister. A flash of sunlight on steel. It was Hank. The old man must have slipped out during the attack on the ranch. He was lying flat on the ridge, an old buffalo rifle resting on a rock. It was a hell of a shot, 100 yards at least. Knox had to create a diversion. He had to draw their attention, give Hank a clear shot. He looked straight at Hollister. "It's over, Hollister. Even if you get the map, you think you'll get away with this? Murdering James? Attacking a woman and a child?" "James was a fool who got greedy," Hollister spat, "and no one will know anything. Just a tragic ranch fire. A drifter who got caught in the middle." He glanced at Knox. "That's you." "You forgot about one thing," Knox said. "And what's that?" Hollister sneered. Knox looked past him, up at the ridge. He looked at Violet, trying to send her a message with his eyes. "Get ready to run." Then he yelled, "Now, Sheriff!" It was a bluff, a desperate, crazy bluff. But it worked. Hollister and Reeves both flinched, their eyes darting around, looking for a posse that wasn't there. In that split second of distraction, the buffalo rifle on the ridge boomed. The shot was perfect. It didn't hit Hollister. It hit the gun in his hand, sending it flying. Hollister screamed, clutching a hand that was now a mangled mess of blood and bone. Everything happened at once. Violet shoved William toward Thunderbolt and scooped up the fallen map. Reeves, recovering from his surprise, swung his gun toward Knox, but Knox was already diving, hitting the ground and rolling, coming up with a rock in his hand. He threw it with all his might, catching Reeves in the face. The gunman staggered back, stunned. It was all the time Knox needed. He charged forward, ignoring the fire in his arm, and slammed his shoulder into Reeves's chest. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Knox's only thought was to get to the gun. They wrestled in the dirt, a desperate, grunting struggle for the weapon. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the ground. Knox drove his elbow into Reeves's throat. The man gagged, his grip loosening for just a second. Knox ripped the pistol from his hand and scrambled back, leveling it at his chest. "It's over!" he gasped. From the corner of his eye, he saw Violet get William onto Thunderbolt and swing up behind him. She was safe. Hollister was on his knees, cradling his shattered hand, his face white with shock and pain. Hank was walking down from the ridge, his ancient rifle held at the ready. But it wasn't over. Not yet. A new sound reached them. The sound of a wagon moving fast. It came over the rise, pulled by two lathered horses. A man was whipping them on, a shotgun resting on the seat beside him. It was Mason, the hotel owner. He hadn't stayed with the main group, he'd circled around. He pulled the wagon to a halt between them and the path to town. He leveled the shotgun. "Nobody moves," he said, his friendly face twisted into an ugly mask of greed. "Drop the gun, Blackwood. Hollister, you fool! I told you this would be messy." The situation had turned on its head in a heartbeat. Hank was too far away. Knox had a pistol, but he'd never beat a shotgun at this range. "The map, Mrs. Preston," Mason said, his voice calm. "Put it on the ground and ride away. I've got no quarrel with you or the boy. But my investors have been very patient. They want what they paid for." Hollister, still on his knees, looked at Mason with betrayal in his eyes. "My investors? They were our investors, Herbert." Mason just laughed. "Your name isn't on the paperwork, Franklin, only mine. You were just the muscle. And you failed." Knox saw his chance. Mason was focused on Violet. Hollister was a wreck. Reeves was still on the ground, gasping for air. He slowly, deliberately, began to raise his pistol toward Mason. "I wouldn't," Mason said without looking at him. "This scattergun will cut you in half before you get a shot off." He was right. It was a stalemate. Then William, safe on the horse behind his mother, did something no one expected. The boy had been holding the new rope Knox had given him. He'd been practicing with it for days. With a cry of childish fury, he stood up in the saddle and threw the rope. It was a clumsy, awkward throw. It wasn't going to settle over Mason's head, but it didn't have to. The loop sailed through the air and snagged on the trigger guard of the shotgun resting on the wagon seat. As William fell back, the rope pulled taut. The shotgun swiveled and discharged with a deafening roar, blowing a hole in the floor of the wagon and sending splinters flying. Mason screamed in shock, dropping the weapon as his terrified horses bolted. The wagon lurched forward, careening out of control, straight for the edge of a steep ravine. Mason, thrown off balance, tumbled from the driver's seat. He tried to get up, but the panicked horses dragged the wagon right over him. He disappeared under the wheels with a sickening crunch. The wagon, with the body of Herbert Mason tangled in the reins, plunged over the edge of the ravine and vanished with a final, splintering crash. Silence descended, a thick, ringing silence, broken only by the sound of Hollister sobbing in pain. It was finally over. By the time Sheriff Bailey and a posse arrived, drawn by the sound of the buffalo gun, it was all finished. They found Knox standing over a subdued Reeves, Hank covering a whimpering Hollister, and Violet comforting a crying but triumphant William. The story came out in a flood. The map, the murder, the conspiracy. Bolton and the other captured men, seeing that the game was up, turned on Hollister, eager to save their own necks. They confirmed everything. The territorial marshal, summoned by Bailey, put Hollister in chains. Whispering Pines was free of its tyrant. A week later, Knox stood with Violet on the porch of the ranch house. The place was already starting to look different. Neighbors, hearing the story, had come to help with repairs. The community that Hollister had tried to strangle with fear was breathing again. His arm was in a sling, but the pain was a dull ache. It was nothing compared to the ache that had been in his heart for 7 years. An ache that was finally, miraculously, gone. William ran up to them, proudly carrying the rope that had saved the day. "Look," he said to Knox. "Mama says I'm a hero." "You are, partner," Knox said, ruffling the boy's hair. "You saved us all." The boy looked from Knox to his mother, a serious expression on his face. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. "Are you going to be my new pa?" Knox looked at Violet. Her eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling. The walls she had built around her heart had finally crumbled. "What do you say, Violet?" Knox asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been a long, hard road back. But I'm home now, if you'll have me." "We lost so much time," she whispered, stepping into his one good arm. "We'll make it up," he promised. "We've got the rest of our lives." He looked out at the vast Wyoming landscape, at the ranch that was now safe, at the future stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. It was a future built on courage, a second chance bought with blood and grit, a love that had refused to die. Their story became a legend in those parts, a tale of how a lone rider and a stubborn widow faced down a tyrant and won back their future. It's a reminder that even after the longest, darkest nights, the sun does rise again. If you enjoyed this story of justice in the Old West, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of the strange, dark, and mysterious.